Hello everybody, and we're here today to talk about alternative proteins and the huge market potential that they hold. So just to quickly introduce myself, I work at Global Counsel, a strategic advisory firm. I work globally with investors and corporates to navigate policy and politics. So let me just set the scene quickly before we introduce our lovely panelists over here. So we know that big changes are needed to transform the food system. In fact, the IPCC's made clear that we have a decade to make major changes to the food and energy system before we get in towards sort of irreversible damage territory. When it comes to the food system, animal agriculture is one of the biggest environmental challenges to address. Luckily, we have some solutions, and one of them being alternative proteins, which are growing ever more popular, as evidenced by all of you here coming to listen to them, about them. So when I say they're getting ever more popular, there's a forecast that they will make up 11% of all protein consumption by 2035. And it could be double that with greater regulatory change and investment. So with all of that in mind, let me just introduce our panelists. So first of all, we have Michael Betz, who's the head of food technology at Handtmann Machine and Fabric. And I hope I pronounced that okay.
That was perfect.
Oh my!
Thanks for the introduction.
Time. Okay, yes. Good. It's going well. So Michael helps to develop state-of-the-art systems for new processes in food production, with a focus at the moment, I believe, on alternative proteins. Next, we have Julian. So Julian Melchiorri is the founder and CEO of Arborea, which is a startup that uses biological and chemical engineering technology to produce healthy food ingredients at low cost and a large scale. And then finally, on the end, we have Kim Odhner, the managing partner for Europe and Asia at Unovis Asset Management. Unovis works with companies innovating along the alternative protein production value chain and centered around novel and efficient animal-free proteins. So there will be a little bit of time for questions at the end, and actually, I will struggle to see the times, but I'll try and keep an eye on it so you have a chance to ask the panel some questions. But let's dive in because I have some. Michael, let's start with you. I've seen you increasingly moving into the production of alternative proteins within your business. Can you talk a little bit about that trend and also whether you see any challenges in meeting the level of production that has been forecast?
Absolutely, yes. So firstly, that's right that we are moving into that direction. We are a producer of processing equipment and lines for manufacturing of foods and alternative protein products. And I would not describe it as a trend anymore, to be honest. I would really say this is a specific sector in the food industry that has established during the last years. And we see a lot of evolvement going on over there. The question about if we are already seeing, or what are the challenges in terms of the production, I would say at the moment we are on a very small percentage of the overall protein consumption that we have worldwide. So we are at a percentage of maybe between 1% and 2%. And you said that there is a challenge of meeting the requirements in productions to reach this 11% you mentioned in 2035. And I think, for the first steps, I think there is everything there to really being able to produce the products. There is a large installed base of production lines worldwide, and the products we see so far in the plant-based sector, they really can be produced on that standard equipment to a large extent. Of course, when it comes to novel technologies like fermentation, I think we will hear a little bit about that topic from Julian as well. Then there is more a bottleneck right away from the very beginning than it is for the plant-based foods. So that's for sure the situation. And when it comes about cultivated, I think it's even further away to really reach levels of a large-scale production.
Thanks, Michael. Julian, at Arborea, you've developed a breakthrough cultivation system. I wonder, can you tell us a little bit more about that and what the reception to that technology has been? And then, are people ready for it, and what's the next steps for scalability?
Okay, yeah, of course. So You know, at Arborea, what we do is that we make food without the footprint. We supply net zero, nature-positive protein and other functional ingredients to the food industry so that we can help them make healthy and sustainable food the primary choice for everyone, not just for the elites that pay double for a burger. And of course, that's a huge challenge. So how's that even possible? Well, we have developed a novel technology. It's called the biosolar leaf, which is basically a novel way to grow and cultivate photosynthetic microorganisms, which is basically like microscopic plants, right? There's 500,000 species of them. There's a huge biodiversity without having to use GM. What's beautiful about this technology is that we don't need any fertile land to grow proteins and ingredients that obviously we extract from these photosynthetic microorganisms. This technology can basically be installed on any surface, even on the roof of buildings. We don't need any agriculturally deriving feedstock, such as sugar, which means, again, you don't have the environmental constraints and the environmental pollution of agriculture. You know, and on top of it is cost efficient, and I'll tell you more about it, and hyper land efficient. And you would say, okay, this is amazing. I mean, it's too good to be true, right? Why we don't see photosynthetic microorganisms deriving ingredients in every food product? And we believe it's because the current technologies to grow them are terribly inefficient. And so when we founded Arborea, we really thought that photosynthetic microorganisms are a key way to feed the world through the centuries to come. And we were just shocked that humanity was not harnessing it. And so what we did is we took a strategic approach. We have been looking at existing technologies, seeking for a pattern that can tell us why these existing technologies are so expensive, so capex intensive, and so low productive in terms of land productivities. And we have seen that there was a common denominator, and we spoke about that the other day. Mass transfer is a big challenge. You know, it's a challenge to emit gases into a liquid and remove gases from that liquid. And when you grow microorganisms, most of them, not all, you need that to be ultra efficient. And so what we've done at Arborea is that we have taken a biomimetic approach. We have been mimicking the breathing mechanisms of human lungs to boost productivities, land productivities, and to slash costs. And you know, imagine that our protein is so land efficient that we could meet the global protein needs of 2050 in just an area the size of Hawaii. And so that's why we are so excited about what we're building. We have now a fully functional demonstration facility in Lisbon, which is producing products now. We have, actually the next step for us is to deploy the first manufacturing facility, or farm, we like to call it, because at the end we grow microscopic plants, so it's like a new crop. And yes, customers are super excited about our platform, about our ingredients. We have, you know, concrete material commitment from them. We are executing several JDAs. We have one with IBM Bev. And so just to conclude, you'd say, okay, what do they care about us? And first and foremost is that our ingredients have the characteristics they are seeking. First is cost. They are affordable, high quality, extremely sustainable, if not the most sustainable. But of course, you might think I'm biased, but I believe into it. And then the only technology that can grow photosynthetic microorganisms, absorb CO2 at atmospheric pressure, and therefore being net zero. And this is net zero even if you use fossil fuel. If you use renewable energy, it would be carbon negative.
Thanks, Julian. I think we'll come back to the net zero point again later as well, because I think that's a really interesting one to touch on there. Kim, at Unovis, you've always been at the forefront of investment in alternative proteins. That's been part of your business model. And I wonder what you see some of the biggest challenges and opportunities being in this space over the next sort of 5 years or even up to 2035.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. You know, I'm always drawn back to our original investment thesis, which goes back quite some time. We always look at this sector through the lens of what we call the food pact. price, awareness, convenience, and taste. And I know that there's just so many interesting things out there today, many more today than there were, say, 10 years ago. But at the end of the day, they all come back to the same thing, and that is price, awareness, convenience, and taste. And that applies not only to consumers, but also to would-be ingredient users that are looking at these ingredients to try and deploy them into the foods that they're creating. And I think, those challenges, we're up against a very, a historic supply chain that utilizes things that are very inexpensive or that for which the market is already well established. And so probably the first and biggest challenge is really getting consumers on board, understanding the importance of what we refer to now as more of a successor's view of some of the foods that we eat, particularly the proteins, and the reasons for doing that. Until we get consumers on side, until we can get regulators on side, and until we can get big food on side, I think we're going to continue to have challenges.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think that the point around regulation and policymakers is really important there. And Michael, and also going back to the pact point that you mentioned there, Kim, Michael, there seem to be these 4 requirements, which Kim was just talking about. On the nutritional value, I think we can all agree the taste profile of alternative proteins has grown exponentially in the last few years. Certainly, as a consumer of alternative proteins, I would say that's the case. But there's been a lot of press around the nutritional value of these products recently, and how, in terms of nutrition, is a meat burger any better than an alternative protein burger, let's say. How do you think the market is going to respond to this, or how have you found that being responded to? And as a sort of follow-up, do you think it's fair to say that there should now be this 5th point around sustainability added to that?
Firstly, if it's about the taste and the texture question, yes, I fully agree that there were large improvements during the last years, but nevertheless there are still products which do not yet fit with the probably expectations of the consumers, which lead to a limited acceptance. And there is, of course, room for improvement, and I think there is a next step that will be taken soon of creating hybrid products where also ingredients not only from plant-based sources come into play, but also from fermentation sources, precision fermentation or biomass fermentation, and then later on also with hybrid products made with cultivated products to improve that taste texture topic. In terms of nutritional profile, I think this will also improve the products if there is a hybrid approach to it. Besides that, I have the impression that many product developments that have been made during the last years were mainly focused on mimicking really the appearance and also trying to mimic the texture of the original products, but not yet focusing really on the nutritional profile. And this is now changing, and the next I would say development cycle is more focused on bringing that nutritional value inside the products. And I think it's also absolutely necessary to bring an honest evaluation of the products to the stage when we talk about not only protein content but also about protein availability. This is something which is not yet included in all these equations, or not, maybe don't say all the equations, but for sure there will be some where it is already included, but often it's not really taken into consideration that the amino acid profile of a plant-based source cannot be used by the body in the same extent like an animal-derived protein. And this is something which the awareness is higher. And then the final question about sustainability, I do agree, and I think all the alternative protein sector has a focus on sustainability. It's part of the equation, and there is also already some eco labels which are tested in the market to really bring all the aspects about the environmental aspects of a food besides the nutritional value, also to transport this information to the consumer. And to my knowledge, this first tests which were made also in the German market, I know about, were quite successful, and the consumers really appreciated this additional information about the environmental impact. So I think this is also a point that will influence the decisions of the consumers more and more, that they want to know really what impact they make with consuming that type of product they are just buying. Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. That's really interesting to hear that it certainly is a factor, and I think we could probably all guess that, but it's good to have that proven.
Can I interject?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
No, just a second. Have you seen what kind of sustainability points were customer more interested in? You know, because I think there's a lot of confusion. Sustainability is a big word, and it's defined, right? And do you have any insights there?
Yes, absolutely. So there, the label I was referring to was introduced in a supermarket chain in Germany, and I think it was last year. And they just did it the same like with the Nutri label. They had a score from A to E. Mm-hmm. And they had underlying different aspects, environmental aspects, pollution aspects, water use, land use, carbon dioxide emissions. So it was, I think, a list of 10 factors they considered in calculating those grades from A to E, and then they were labeling it on the products. Yeah.
You know, it seems to me that the traffic light system puts the power of decision-making in the hand of the consumer. And I think consumers recognize that their health and well-being is really within their control. In other words, it's their job to look after their own health and well-being. But I think somehow in this whole sustainability thing, unfortunately, I don't think that consumers feel as powerful. I think in that dynamic, I think that they may see these, let's say the equivalent of a traffic light system, and they may, choose from time to time to consume what they perceive to be a healthier, or what the system indicates as a healthier product. But I think at the end of the day, the perception or the general belief is that lies beyond their immediate control. I think that's one of the challenges that we face in this whole space. And when I think about let's say broadly sustainability as a driver, I don't think that is, I see that more as an imperative. And I think somehow, in a societal sense, we need to recognize that it's an imperative. Nutrition is a choice. Unless the healthcare systems enter in and impose, sort of along the lines of Boris Johnson, somebody had mentioned earlier today, unless somebody steps in and starts to legislate around health, the availability of healthy product, or the insistence on certain levels of health standards, I think in terms of sustainability, I see that as much more of an imperative that needs to be imposed in order for this really to move forward.
I think that's really well put, Kim, and quite agree. And we are seeing, actually, in terms of policy in the UK and the EU, there is upcoming legislation that's coming in terms of eco-labels and sort of anti-greenwashing legislation, that sort of thing, that is putting sustainability at the heart of marketing decision-making, those sorts of things. So I think that trend is definitely coming. How quickly? Well, let's see. Actually, another question for you, Kim, while you have the floor. How does the price differentiation in relation to alternative proteins versus meat products, with all the recent ongoing supply chain, food price shocks, how's this played out for Unovis's investments?
Well, I think it varies widely depending on what they're doing and the ingredients that they're reliant upon. Certainly, I think it's caused a lot of companies to look at some of their ingredient decks and potentially source alternatives. But I think for the most part, it hasn't had a profound change on the products themselves. It's affected margins, certainly, but I don't think that they're in a position to be able to turn around and ask consumers to pay more money simply because they've got supply chain challenges. And I think, at the end of the day, unfortunately, plant-based foods typically are more expensive. They're at the premium end of the market, which seems seems a little ridiculous. And I think part of the reason why it is ridiculous is kind of going all the way back to my comment around how the sort of the incumbent supply chain has functioned and how it has really delivered through subsidies and scale, has delivered ingredients that by all rights should be cheaper. Soy being one perfect example. 70% of soy goes into animal feed. So how does that work when in a cow, for example, it's a 40-to-1 ratio as to calories in versus calories out. So so I think we all intellectually understand that the supply chains are not necessarily geared to support these kinds of plant-based alternatives. But I think even looking at some of the companies that we've invested in and kind of the space more broadly as we look at animal-based sort of meat alternatives, I think to a certain extent, we need to recognize that where those products are most effective at competing is really as an ingredient. And I think increasingly the cases where I see companies deploying products and SKUs that are really targeted toward an ingredient play, they tend to be more, they tend to have higher rotations and they're more successful. If you're looking to recreate a center of the plate piece of meat, I think the hurdle is much, much higher.
Thanks, Ken. That's really interesting insights. Lastly, and then I will hand over to the audience for some questions. Let's go back to that net zero point, Julian. When it comes to net zero sustainability of food production, do you see alternative proteins as a viable way for companies and indeed countries to meet their net zero goals?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that why? The current food system, we already said, everyone knows it, is already exceeding limits in terms of CO2 emissions, freshwater withdrawals, and land use. And, actually, we have done a pretty simple calculation. If you want to feed the world in 2050, switch it off. Okay. If you want to feed, if you want to feed the world by 2050, with the current system, you would need to convert an additional area the size of Africa from nature to food production. It's a lot of land. It's going to cause a lot of distress. We're going to manage it, but it's going to be impactful. So, it's obvious to think that we need to find a solution. Alternative protein, I think, are key. I think we are clear on that. I think the question is how fast we'll be, to implement these innovations. And when we, as a society, we realize the impact that if we don't do it. But to better understand, the thing is, alternative protein, they are not the same, right? They are defined by their platform. And I think that, to have an impact, you need to be scalable. How I see scalability, I see it as sustainability. You need sustainability, you need cost, and you need quality. Quality, by the way, is taste, nutritional, you can expand it as much as you want. But if you don't have all three of them, and again, it's sustainability, cost, and quality, you're not going to scale, especially in a food system. This is not a software, it's a food system. We need to reinvent the food system. And to do so, we have to create another system that meets and follows the many complex biological systems we have on this planet. This planet has finite resources. So you cannot just think that sustainability is a nice to have. No, it's a must to scale. And so, how I like to see it and to differentiate also our platform in respect to the other alternative protein platforms is that we like to see, of course, all those. But in sustainability, you can actually expand a bit more. You can see in terms of inputs, what's the feedstock, which I think is one of the major bottleneck for sustainability in some alternative proteins. Then you need to see what's the freshwater withdrawals, what's the outputs, so the waste, and what's the land use. And so, when someone analyzes this, I think it needs to always try and differentiate them in base of those, and you will see which one makes more sense holistically. Of course, I think photosynthesis is the way, but not just, I don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? Nature has been doing it for 3 billion of years, actually 2 point something, and it just fits within the logical systems of this planet. So that's why we are so excited about what we are building at Arborea, is that we can finally unlock photosynthesis for the good of humanity to feed the world through the centuries to come without costing the earth, I think, yeah.
May I just add a remark to Julian? I think wouldn't it not make sense to also add another point? You said cost, sustainability, and scalability. Would it not also be availability of the equipment you need? Because this is something really, you see scalable processes, but they are not available at the moment. And this is also a big task if you consider the expected growth and the goals that are behind the, for example, fermentation process. Yeah.
Yeah. How's it looking like? You are obviously more expert. We do photosynthetic fermentation different. We don't use fermenters, and so you do. Can you tell us a bit more maybe of what's the situation globally? Because we had a quick discussion.
Yeah, we had a discussion about it already in advance. Yeah, absolutely. I think the bottleneck actually is capacity for fermentation. So that means if you want to produce alternative protein biomass using the fermentation in a submerged fermenter, like a bioreactor, these bioreactors are not available. And that's the bottleneck. So it's known that you can scale it easily, but the systems are not yet there. And that's something also to be considered when you go into that discussion, I think.
What you were saying when we were talking before, there's in terms of that there are queues of about 15 years for availability of some technologies.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah.
There is a lot of demand, and were new databases also established which show fermentation capacity worldwide. And knowing from discussions is that for many providers of fermentation capacity, this volume is already reserved for years, so to say. But not yet meeting the full requirements. So that's still there's still a big gap. Yeah.
Any thoughts on how to fill that? Anyone?
No. One of the things I think is kind of interesting, maybe it goes back to something I was saying earlier, which is that, therefore, we should be looking at, higher use. I mean, what is that fermentation equipment being used for? And if it's being used to recreate a simple center-of-the-plate piece of protein or something like that, we should try to assess whether or not that's a good use. I mean, there is a lot of really important work being done through precision fermentation and things like that can add a much higher value contribution. And so therefore, I guess, ultimately, that's where the free market is going to shake out some of these innovative
Prioritization. Yeah. I would like to leave a little bit of time for questions because, as you can see, this panel is very knowledgeable and very passionate, and we've already talked at length offline about this as well. So, any questions from the audience? Don't be shy.
Do we have it?
Otherwise, we'll just keep on talking.
Yeah,
Yes,
we seem to have
down
one
in the front
question.
there.
Madam?
You've been discussing about accessibility, sustainability, and cost, and I would add taste and flavor, which are also very important, and that is a big challenge even for artificial intelligence, how to help in that regard. So taste and flavor in novel food, in plant-based food is really important.
Did you have a question, or is it just... Yeah. No, I think this is what you're talking about, so the pact, isn't it? It has to be, the taste has to be there for the product to be appealing to consumers. When you're talking about the sort of consumer prioritization of those things, is it in order? Is it price first, and then...
Yeah, I mean, we used to say that it was price, but I mean, I think increasingly the real challenge is the application. In other words, we're talking alt protein. I mean, there's so many different types of alt protein, and there's so many different applications. There's so many different stages. Is it an ingredient? Is it a complete, sort of a complete ingredient in the case of, let's say, some of the plant-based analogs? I mean, there's many different alt proteins, but if we're talking specifically around plant-based foods, for example, I think when you take a plant-based meat analog that, made of some pulse legume or some kind of a cereal, and you put that in a sauce, and you put it in sort of a generally recognized application that people are focused more on the sauces and things like that, I think it then becomes, the focus really becomes on the texture itself. And so the texture, even the texture can make use of things like AI. I mean, you can, if it happens to be a 3D printed piece of meat, for example, you're looking at the fibers and you're looking at the direction of the fibers based on the kind of meat that it is and the kind of texture that you're looking to achieve. There's lots of different ways that you can look at that. The question is, how important is that to the consumer in that application? And then even going back to taste. Taste is much more important in an application where the meat is center of the plate, where effectively you're looking for the taste in that application. Whereas if it's in a bolognese or something like that, then it becomes less and less important.
And just to add as well, is maybe I take a different approach here. Is in our case, when you hear about microalgae, you always think about, oh my God, the taste and the spirulina, right, and the color and so on. But actually, we managed to decolorize and to have a neutral taste protein that has functional properties of gelling, water solubility, emulsifying, and so on. And funny enough, you say about taste, it's great. And for us, when we go to plant-based alternative meat companies, they want a neutral taste from us, as neutral as possible, because they are focusing a lot of energies in modularizing the right taste, and they want a nice clean canvas. So it's fascinating to see that, as you said, there is such a complex and wide world of applications, where the ingredients, what does that ingredient does in the matrix, and it's really interesting.
It's such a personal choice, isn't it? Yeah.
And for sure, it's not a one-for-all solution. Then there are different solutions, different alternative protein sources and technologies providing solutions to certain food problems. I would describe it. And that's something also, if you have, like you said, a neutral protein with a high functionality, then of course you can develop it in different directions to use it as a platform technology. But then, of course, you need further technologies to make sure that you achieve, for example, a fibrous structure if the protein allows for that. Otherwise, you use it more for a bakery application or something like that. Yeah.
I think we had a question down in the front there, the gentleman to my left. In the meantime, has anyone tried a 3D printed steak or piece of meat? Because they're delicious, by the way. I would recommend you all try them. Anyway, I filled the time. Over to your question.
Yes, I tested them, and indeed they're very interesting. My question is, so we have the solutions on the one hand side, we have the empowerment of the consumers on the other hand side with the Nutri-Scores and the choice they can make. But really, to have the market adoption, you also need the CPGs or the companies to actually buy it and use it. So what does the panel think on what kind of barriers needs to be overcome, or what kind of call to action you have for the industry to facilitate this takeoff of the alternative proteins?
Can I? Okay, I have a friend at Unilever that kind of painted an interesting picture for me, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily, sort of a wide perspective at the board level in Unilever, but one of the things they were pointing out is that to consumers, or I mean to their stakeholders, they're purporting their initiatives to try and become increasingly sustainable. And if you look at a big super tanker, a big ship like Unilever, its ability to be nimble and to shift directions, what it controls on its own is very, very limited, and it takes a very, very long time for it to change its behavior. So one of the fastest ways that it can start to change its behavior is through the supply chains. So in other words, relying on others to provide them with ingredients or inputs that they can report on as having contributed to their sort of sustainability initiatives internally. So I thought that was a really, really interesting way of looking at it. And so I think, first of all, it's dependent on suppliers to produce ingredients that are functional and that can serve the purpose and the applications that they want to use them, but then also delivering to them the benefit in terms of the kind of statistical data that they can present on the sustainability side to their consumers. So I think that's just one example of where I think it's kind of interesting. But again, they really need to be functionally and nutritionally, and even price point, they need to work.
Affordable, yeah, that's key. Cost in use, yeah, definitely. No, I agree. So I think that also facilitating, I believe that if you have an ingredient that, as you say, has the taste, has the sustainability aspect, has the cost profile, and can scale, which I believe is one of the biggest challenge for alternative protein platform, is the scalability in relation to sustainability. The feedstock is going to be a definer for hydrogen-trophic bacteria, for methanol-trophic bacteria, for heterotrophic bacteria, which are the microorganisms which are the one based on sugar. I think it's going to be a bottleneck because, how are you going to, it's important to remind ourselves that all the energy that is stored in our body comes from sunlight. All the energy stored in food also starts off as sunlight. And on our planet, we have a limited surface area exposed to sunlight, isn't it? And so it's logic that as humanity, if we want to develop a technology that can feed the world, you need to have the most solar efficient technology to do this. And you will see that this would also influence the cost of production and the capex to lighten it up. If you can manage to harness sunlight in the most efficient way. Photosynthesis, until now, is the most efficient. There was a bottleneck, which was CO2 sequestration. Everyone who says, I'm using CO2, it's actually needing CO2 in a pressurized state and not an atmospheric pressure. And that's very expensive. And that's why they mostly buy CO2, which we think is crazy. So our competitors buy CO2, synthetically produced. And say, okay, why? Well, obviously you have an issue. We solved it, and that's another reason why. So if you look at the solar conversion efficiency of a fermentation-based platform against a photosynthetic one, it's actually the ratio is 50 to 1, so you need more than 50 times more land, but then you have another problem, which is the cost profile of a feedstock that can have price fluctuations. It's unsafe. So it's a big challenge, I think, the feedstock side for big companies to accept it. In fact, when we speak with corporations, it's really satisfying when we really get to that level of detail, to really try and understand systemically what are the issues and how to solve them. And more we do these sorts of engagements with the public, more you see corporates really appreciating what we are doing and working together to make sure that we can provide these ingredients, these tools for them to make as well the revolution we all want to do.
And if I'm allowed, I would also want to answer that question about how producers can facilitate it. I would want to add, at the short term, I think one key is not to promise things you cannot fulfill. Because I think this was one of the problems of the market so far, that there were products released giving you the marketing slogan of meeting the real meat or real dairy taste profile, and then the consumers were disappointed by the actual performance of the product, leading to not rebuying it. And this is something which is under control of the producers, and of course it takes a little bit more time to market to make a, I would say, improved development of a product, and this should be also part of the strategy to really achieve best quality and not being one of the early movers of the markets, but not delivering the quality.
Great answers. We have time for one more question at the back there.
Who wanted to pose? Yeah. 1 minute left, ladies and gentlemen. No pressure.
I'll keep it very short. I had a question around financing in this concept. I hear you talking about several times that this is quite a capital-intense market. And I think in the current macroeconomic environment that we are in, getting cash to finance startups and scale-ups in this space will become and is becoming more difficult. What would be the great result and unlock here? Is it going to be that we see corporates shifting their M&A activities to this? Is this going to be a survival of the fittest in certain private equity or venture capitalists and a race to the bottom? Is it going to be a slowdown? What is the impact of the current environment that you see here on that development?
Kim, did you want to make a start, and then we'll come back along and finish up?
Sure, I'll be quick. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's like any new industry, ultimately where you start to really see capital catalyzed is when standards start to emerge. And I think today, we're still in that environment where there are a few standards, there are lots of competitors, and we're going to go through a period of company failure and also some consolidation. And I think as we start to see the companies that survive and the ones that start to move forward with the technologies that they've embraced, and as we start to see standards starting to emerge, I think that's where you'll start to see real serious capital come to play.
And I can just top it up by personal experience, because of course we need to build facilities because our innovation is the cultivation technology as well as the product development side of things. So I think the key as an entrepreneur is to build the first mass production facility, and that one is the most challenging one, because if you build the first one that proves the cost profile, the financing, you have the customers that needs it, then you can get easier project financing later. That financing, European Union as well, is going to go more and more into supporting these sorts of activities, I believe, in other countries around the world. So the big hurdle is the first. And how can you do it? You need to be creative. You can find a consortium of partners that perhaps they are interested in your product, are interested in the sustainability profile, but also they're interested in the profits. So you say, okay, let's share a bit. Let's do this together. And I think that's the major target for entrepreneurs that perhaps are doing something like that. And then I think the key thing is not just CapEx, but we need to see CapEx versus value produced. Right, that's the unit economics. I'm not sure what you think when you see CapEx, because you can do CapEx against volumes, CapEx against profits, and I think CapEx against profit is the most interesting one from an investment point of view, perhaps.
Well, venture investors are not creative investors typically, and I don't think that this sector aligns itself very nicely at this stage with venture capital money and the expected returns and so forth. So I totally agree. I mean, I think CapEx is a major problem. Today we have a lot of venture capital firms that have stepped in and financed CapEx, and that's not really the job of a venture capital firm. So I think making available different avenues for CapEx expenditure is definitely going to be an important part of that catalyst that I was referring to. But unfortunately, you still need to prove out that technology as being a durable technology that will prevail in the long run. And I think we're still at a stage where companies have invested enormous amounts of money in CapEx only to come to the realization that their technology is really not going to be the favored technology going forward. So I think we're still in that shakeout phase, and I think until we've really seen some standards emerge and until we've seen more and more consolidation, I think we're going to continue to struggle with funding for the near term.
Thank you so much, and I'm sorry we have overrun a little bit. I just didn't want to cut you off there, and I'm afraid no more time for an answer from you, Michael. But what I'm hearing strongly is collaboration and standards the next step. So thank you very much to our panel.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Michael, Julian, Kim, and Alice for chairing the discussion. Thank you so very much.